Hey guys, what's going on? It's me, Jay, here to talk a little bit about this new news that's coming out about India Arie, R&B, basically a '90s R&B artist known for one of my favorite songs, "My Hair" back in the day. Really like a neo soul type uh, R&B artist from back in the day, coming out publicly criticizing uh, the Essence musical performance of Janelle Monae and Megan Thee Stallion. So, at least what's going on. For many people that don't know, um, the Essence Music Festival is, of course, an African American themed music festival featuring R&B artists, hip hop artists, and the like, mostly geared towards the older, you know, us, our generation, millennial, uh, 30s and 40s type fans of urban music, R&B, soul, hip hop, and all that. But at this particular event, they were trying to reach out to a broader audience, obviously, a younger demographic, more of the newer generation. That's probably why they had Megan Thee Stallion there, because the other acts that were there, T.I., Juvenile, um, even Janelle Monae, who is a kind of a newer artist, but the style of music she makes is kind of more retro and kind of more classic. And but Megan Thee Stallion doesn't really fit that. She's more, of course, she's a newer artist. She's more trap music, thought music. So I think that they were trying to broaden their horizons with that. Usually, other years past, they've had people like Janet Jackson there, for example. People like Ice Cube have been there. You know, like I said, artists that reach out to it's an older demographic music festival. But of course, people bring their kids there. People bring younger people there to expose them, just like with our parents back in the day, exposing us to the music of their generation. Right? They would bring us to older music festivals with artists from their generation to see them perform. Like my grandmother brought me to concerts with the Temptations, the Supremes, for example, things like that. So people might bring, you know, their younger family members to this music festival, and some of their younger family members may be minors. Now, India was very vocal about her criticism of this performance. I'm going to read to you guys what she actually said. She says the issue is what is context? Humanity does everything, but does everything belong in a stage? No. Is everything for kids? No. Is everything for everybody? No. So when we as a culture make something like this mainstream, it shows a lack of discretion and discernment. To those in the comments who laugh at anyone who wants these things for our culture, you certainly have that right, just as many folks have the right to want our mainstream international export, our music, to show us in a respectful light. Saying this won't age well, and that's my issue. I love Janelle and Meg as I love us all, and I don't like this. And I don't like this moment. Don't bother debating me. I don't care. I've done this for 25 years. For 25 years, I've done this. Read, ponder, or don't. So basically, what she's saying here is that yes, anybody can do anything they want. We're in a free country. There's freedom to do whatever you like, whatever your prerogative. But what she's talking about is there's a time and a place for everything. Is this the appropriate time? And is this the appropriate place? And is this the appropriate venue? There are places that you can do this kind of stuff. There is Summer Jam. There is more hip hop type music festivals that this kind of thing is appropriate, that this kind of thing is done. This is Freaknik back in the day, or I don't know, any other kind of music festival. But there are other times when this is not appropriate. It's not appropriate for every time and every place. Another point that she's trying to make is that when it comes to, and I've said this often, when it comes to popular music and popular culture, for the African American community in particular, but for the broader American community, right now as it stands, when it comes to industries, our greatest export is our entertainment. That's the only thing that we have that is objectively better than other places in the world. We don't really have anything else at this point in time in 2023 that is greater than anybody else. Our cars are not better than European cars or Japanese cars. Our technology is not better than Korean technology or Israeli technology or any other kind of technology. It's subpar. Education system is subpar compared to other countries. Our healthcare system is subpar compared to other countries. The only thing that we really have is our entertainment. That is indeed our greatest export. And of course, as we know, due to systemic racism and white supremacy, African Americans, particularly African American women, have been shut out of mainstream career opportunities for the longest time. And entertainment has been one of those vehicles to gain a greater exposure to the wider world. So if she's saying is what she's saying is this is the image that you want to put forward. And we've had this debate on this channel before when it came to Lizzo. People say, okay, it's appropriate for Lizzo to do these things because it's about sex positivity and body positivity and loving herself. And like India is saying, just because she can do these things, should she do these things? You got to understand, we live in a globalized world, a globalized system, right? A system that uh, everyone around the world sees. And if this is the image that everyone around the world sees as a representation of black femininity, is that a good thing? People are increasingly traveling to other parts of the world. We're seeing people, finally Americans becoming broader in their outlook and finally getting their passports and going to places like Africa, places like Asia. And when they go to these places, is that the image they want other cultures to see them as? You know what I mean? Because what we see from other cultures in terms of their entertainment and their art is how they're represented. Like, for example, uh, Russians. We tend to see Russians as angry people, always yelling, always screaming, and always stern because that's the representation that they put forth in a real warrior culture because that's the representation they put forth in their media. And same thing with Germans. And we tend to see the French as bougie and the French as high class because that's the representation that they put forth in their media. So, uh, 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 there was a time before in American culture when the black man and woman was seen as really classy, really upscale, really religious, really conservative, like in the 50s and 60s and part of the 70s. And then, with the advent of rap music and stuff like that, there was a time when everything changed around it. Everything was different, and people were seen as gangsterism era and everything. But that was more so the men. The women really didn't have a bad representation, even back when Little Kim was doing stuff like this. Back in the '90s when it first started, that was seen as highly offensive because that was not done. Women rappers in the beginning of hip hop, they went out of their way to be more like the men and to neutralize uh, their sexuality. You know, rappers like Queen Latifah, rappers like MC Light. MC Light was going for more for the street vibe. Latifah was talking about unity and UNITY and self respect. They didn't embrace that fully. And then with Little Kim, she was seen as an outlier. She was seen as something different, and they didn't really fully embrace it either. A lot of her fans were, guys. But now women finally have taken the mic in hip hop, as it were. Women have finally. There are more. The more the newer rappers, more the newer hip hop artists that people are talking about are women. People are talking about the Glorillas, um, the Megan the Stallions, the Cardis, and the Ice Spices more than they're talking about any of the men rappers. I bet you if you go on the street right now and you say to the average person, not the hip hop enthusiast or the hip hop head, you say to the average individual, male or female, the five of the newest MCs, most of them, three out of the five, and maybe in the entire five, will be female MCs, the newer ones, right? They might name the baby, they might name Lil Baby, but they'll mostly Ice Spice will be there, Gorilla will be there, Lotto will be there, Coil Ray will be there. Look at the Summer Jam lineup this past year. It was more the newer MCs were all female. So females have finally taken the reins in hip hop, and this is what they put out. This is the face of female representation in hip hop. Now, okay, you could go to the point, and I'm sure many people will. They'll go to the point where they'll say, yes, the females are representing, the females are the face of it, but the men are the ones writing it, and the men are the ones putting it together, and they're catering to the male demographic, and the guys like sex. But here's the real thing that I want to tell you guys as a male hip hop fan. We don't, as men, we don't look to these songs, and we don't get turned on. We're not the main consumers of these songs. You know, we'll have, as hip hop fans, we'll have more respect for a woman like a Lauren Hill or Arie, somebody like this, more than a Megan Thee Stallion or a Cardi B. We might enjoy a Cardi B song because she does a really good job on a track or whatever, but we're not gonna go out there and we're not gonna bump the Ice Spices, the Glorillas, any of this shit. The City Girls. Men don't really care about stuff like that. We like to see women acting nasty on things like videos, and we're visual. Men are visual creatures. We like to see women doing dirty things. So we may like the videos, right? Like WAP or whatever, right? That shit from Megan Thee Stallion. We may like the videos, but the audio, the hearing of it, that's not going to do anything for us. That's not going to move us as men. You know what I'm saying? So really, they think that they're catering to the male demographic, but they're really not catering to the male demographic. They're more so creating a greater female demographic from the younger female audience. Because think about it. What do we remember? We remember Unity. We remember the Lauryn Hill album, Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. People still talk about that album like 20 plus years later. Do people still talk about any of the sexual raps that Lil Kim came out with, that Foxy Brown came out with, that any of these other provocative sexual art came out with? No, they weren't timeless in a sense because that kind of behavior is a dime a dozen. And people are going to sit there and say when it comes to India Arie that this is sour grapes, that this is her just complaining because artists like her, artists that make the kind of music that she makes, are not getting any play, any representation. Lisa's saying, okay, with the women rappers, it's more about the sexuality rather than the lyrics. Lyrics content with female rappers is horrible. Yeah, but so it is with the men. I mean, let's just face it, in the era that we are in with hip hop, with men and women, right? In the era we're in with hip hop right now, lyrics don't matter for either gender. Lyrics, a great lyrical rapper is like a pink elephant right now. You know what I mean? It's like a an exotic Bengal tiger. You know what I mean? It doesn't exist. It exists, but it exists on the underground. You got to really dig deep. When it comes to mainstream rappers, radio stations like Hot 97, Power 105, and all the radio stations throughout the country aren't really checking for uh, lyrical rappers like of any gender. You know what I mean? That's not gonna get you play because even women that can rap, you know what I mean? Even like Nicki Minaj is pretty okay and decent when it came to her raps because I heard her, you know, when she first came out before Lil Wayne even put her out. But she had to dumb down her image because at that time when she first came out in 2010, already lyrics had already been passe. Lyrical hip hop is a staple of New York northeastern hip hop. It's not really a staple of down south hip hop. It's not really a part or component of West Coast hip hop. You have some. You know, you have Kendrick Lamar, for example. He's a West Coast rapper. He's very lyrical. J. Cole's a Southern rapper from Virginia. He's very lyrical. You know what I mean? So you do have some, but overall, Southern hip hop music and the South has been basically the center of hip hop for the longest now, at least since like 98, 99 when No Limit and Cash Money came out. You know, they were the first ones to really come out with this club scene sound because Outkast was out, but Outkast, you know, was something different. Outkast was tapping into a different vibe. Goody Mob was tapping into a different vibe. So when it became more centered on the club style, you know, in the late '90s and early 2000s, lyrics went out the window because, as people have often said, when you're in a party or when you're in a club, you don't really have the time or the want or the desire to sit down and listen to heavy lyrics, to the Nas's, to the Lauryn Hills, to the Queen Latifahs. That's not what you go to a club for. Nobody wants to sit there and listen to an educational track or something positive in a club. That's people want to dance, people want to have a good time, people want to get freaky, and music is catered to that. Just like India Arie's talking about, timing and place. There's a time and place for everything. But when it comes to essence, here you're talking about essence. You're talking about two magazines that came out in the 1960s that catered to a black middle and upper class society, Essence and Ebony. These are class magazines. This would be like if Time magazine for Caucasian people, if Time magazine had a festival of musicians, like different musicians, and they got somebody up there that was like I don't know in Caucasian music and white music. There's no really somebody that's really sexual provocative, but say you're taking it back to the '80s, right? And you had somebody up there like Madonna, right? She was doing what she was doing, humping the stage, 1984, and the MTV Video Music Awards, or kissing Christina Aguilera, Britney Spears. That's the Video Music Awards. That's for the younger audience. That's for the younger demographic. But if she went out there on Time Magazine Festival, right, a magazine that caters to the educational audience, like your educational upper middle class audience of Caucasian people, and did something like that, do you think the Caucasian audience would take that line down? They would take it as a sign of disrespect because that's not appropriate for that particular publication, that particular culture. That's not, we're not here for that. You know what I'm saying? We're here to represent a different demographic, a different of the African American culture and community. There's a place for everything. And Essence Magazine, Essence Music Festival is not the time and the place for ratchet ghetto behavior. Summer jams, things that hip hop oriented are for that. Even Luther Campbell, Luther Campbell, this is the guy that made Me So Horny back in the 80s. The one of the first albums or songs to cause a stir when it came to representations of sexuality with Tipper Gore and the Senate back in the day. He even came out and said that he felt it was weird that Janelle Monae was doing what Janelle Monae was doing because Janelle Monae is not Megan the Stallion. Like with Megan the Stallion, nobody really batted an eyelash. Nobody really cared because Megan Stallion is who Megan the Stallion is. We know the type of music that she puts out. If Essence want to hire her, that's taking an L from Essence. They're taking away from their image and everything. You know what I mean? But Janelle Monae doesn't do that. You know what I'm saying? Remember with Nas when Illmatic first came out in 1994. Nas was part of that wave of rappers, that wave of male rappers. The Native Tongue Posse, Tribe Called Quest, uh, you know, late 80s, early 90s, conscious rappers that was, kind of street sophisticated, but really conscious and really lyrical on his end. And it was a different kind of vibe. It didn't go along with the West Coast gangster rap vibe that was more popular of the Dre's and the Snoops and the Dog Pounds and everything. It didn't fit into that character of overt, violent, hyper masculine behavior, right? But then when that didn't sell well and it didn't do well commercially, in 1996 when it was written, switched it up. He had Dre as a producer. He tried to do more gangster stuff. He tried to do more street stuff. Tried to do more violent stuff, and people really wasn't feeling it. And when it came to the song that people remember from that album, it was "If I Ruled the World" with him and Lauryn Hill, which was a more conscious type song that was typical of Nas. So that's kind of like what Janelle Monae is doing here. It's like that's not you, sis. Like you're not about that. You know what I'm saying? You're just trying to do that now to gain attention and to cater to a different demographic because you want to remain relevant. People will accuse India Arie of saying that she wants to remain relevant and that she wants to keep her name out there. It looks like they were doing with Lord Jamar back in like the mid 2000s when Lord Jamar was out there criticizing Kanye West for wearing a kilt. He was basically saying that Kanye West was promoting femininity among men. And then he would go on to criticize other rappers and other acts, like when he called Eminem a guest in the House of Hip Hop. And people were always like, "Oh, Lord Jamar is somebody out there always going on Vlad's channel and always trying to remain relevant with his provocative comments and he's old." People will say that about India Arie, but I think when you switch your whole style up to try to remain relevant and try to really be something you're not, then you really take an L. You know what I mean? Because Janelle Monae is not that. Janelle Monae is in the category with India Arie. She's in the category with the Jill Scotts. She's neo soul, which is basically the R&B equivalent of conscious hip hop, the R&B equivalent of uh, at least the same BT Awards rapper Glorilla performed a song called "Lick Lick" or some. None of her fans liked it. She was trying to be. She said she was trying to be more sexual in her performance. She told her fans she wants because that's the wave. She wants to be more sexy because that's the wave. That's what people are doing now. That's Nicki Minaj was really the mother of this in hip hop. Little Kim was. People are always gonna say, okay, Little Kim started the trend, but Little Kim came out in '95. By '99, when Eve came out, for example, or in the early 2000s when Remy Ma came out, women were still trying to be street. Women were not trying to do this sexy shit. They were still trying to act like the female counterparts to their male rappers on the same sort of energy. You know what I mean? It wasn't until Nicki Minaj fully embraced this uber hyper feminine sexuality in her music that this became the wave. Then you had the Iggy Azaleas. Like I said in other videos, white people tried to well, not really white people, but Ti tried to uh, create like a white version of that with Iggy Azalea. Then you had Cardi B. Now you have Ice Spice. All these newer rappers, all the female rappers are all hypersexual, except for this new girl that I just came across just yesterday, Scarlett. Scarlett is not hypersexual. She is like a female DMX, basically. And she has a very interesting yet tragic backstory featured on Vlad TV interview. So that's a different kind of vibe. That's a more gangster vibe. And I think that to me is better. I mean, people say that that has its negativities too. You know what I mean? Conscious rappers, conscious people were uh, bashing, always bashing Lisa Singh. A lot of women who listen to female rappers are tired of this trend, though. But I think, yeah, because that's what record companies do. She thinks that record companies make them do. Because that's what record companies do. It's when you have a trend, like when you had, think of all the times when we were alive, right, in music, when there was trends. There was the trend of blending rock and rap in the beginning with Run DMC. Then there was the trend of Afrocentric and conscious hip hop in the late 80s and early 90s that we talked about. Then there was the trend of West Coast gangster rap. Then there was the trend of New York hardcore music after Biggie came out in '94. You know what I mean? You had a bunch of New York rappers just suddenly drop, Jay Z among them. Then you had the trend after Biggie and Pac died uh, of down south rappers. When New Orleans was popping, you had Cash Money Millionaires and No Limit. Then you had Rough Riders. Then you had every single time that there's a trend, they follow the crunk trend, the hyphy trend. And baggy pants trend with women, yeah, there was a time in the early '90s. Lisa's absolutely correct when TLC came out, Aaliyah came out, Salt and Pepper. No, not Salt and Pepper really, but like I say TLC, Aaliyah. There was a trend with female rappers when they were trying to dress SWV, yeah, when they were trying to dress like the males. Now that's not the case. Like we see it visually too. What's the trend in rap videos now? Rap videos lack creativity. I was watching uh, the Ice Spice song, you know, uh, uh, Munch. I was watching it, and I'm like, man, Michael Jackson, if he were alive, he wasn't doing rap, but if he were alive, just the art of music videos and how he took the level of music videos he took music videos to another level, making mini movies, for example, with intricate storytelling and all that. He would be ashamed to watch music videos nowadays because what is a music video since at least Bobby Shmurda came out in 2015 with hot, hot blank. What is it basically? It is a guy or a girl rapping and a bunch of people around them getting sturdy and doing dances around them in a ghetto location like a park or a basketball court. You know what I mean? And it's no real story behind it. It's just people rapping and another person around them just dancing. That's all music videos are right now. You know what I'm saying? Bobby Shmurda was like that. Uh, Young M.A.'s song "Ooh" was like that in 2016. Wolfie was like that when CJ came out in 2020. And now with the Ice Spice video, and basically every mainstream rap song you'll see, it'll just be that. It'll be somebody, a guy or a girl, rapping, and another person, like a basketball court or a park, just dancing around and doing stupid motions, probably flashing gang signs or whatever, and just that's just that's just the video. You know what I mean? All of Takashi 69's uh, first video, the Gummo video, was like that too. People just dancing, somebody sitting on a corner, rapping, and people just dancing around them. That's music videos right now, and that is low quality. That's unoriginal. You know what I mean? Every music video to be like that, you know what I'm saying? Like you got to have some story to it. Yes, we could say, well, okay, that's how they start out because they're newer artists. You know what I mean? CJ, his first song was Whoopty, or Ice Spice, her first song was Munch. You know what I mean? Takashi, first song. They're artists starting out. They don't have a lot of money. They don't have a huge video budget, so they can't make these long, elaborate videos like they would want. But at least come up with something a little bit different. At least invest some time and energy into some creativity. Hell, the people on YouTube that make music do a better job than some of these artists. They have major record labels backing them. Why are they coming up with such unoriginality? And that's just I guess how it is. You know what I mean? Now, Lisa Singh, they wanted people to focus more on the voice and the lyrics rather than what they was wearing, but now it's the opposite. Yeah, because people have shorter attention spans. Even here on YouTube, uh, the videos that get the most likes and the most views are videos that are short, small content videos. Yes, video essays get a lot of views, but most of the people, like with a video essay, if it's like FD Signifier or somebody like that that does these long videos, he'll do a review on Baby Boy or he'll do a review on Love and Basketball, and people will watch like 5 or 10 minutes of it. They'll get bored of it. They'll click right out of it, right? Or even worse, somebody like myself that's long form commentaries, or somebody like Sergeant Bully Pete will do a video, and people will watch like 10 seconds of it, get bored, and say, "Okay, I'm done with it." You know what I mean? But the irony of it is, people will listen to longer podcasts. Podcasts that are 2 or 3 hours, and that wouldn't really bother them. I guess because it doesn't involve watching them, they could just turn off their phones or whatever, and they could just work out, or they could just do whatever while they're listening to, say, Fresh and Fit, or listening to whatever, or listening to the Daily Wire, or whatever podcast, Joe Buttons, Joe Rogan, whoever they listen to. Uh, you know, as far as podcasts, and they can tune in and tune out. But people have shorter attention spans, so that's the answer why they don't really focus on the lyrics, because people have shorter attention spans. So that's just how it is. Now I'm the opposite. I like the longer videos. I like my own videos to be longer. I like uh, a huge fan of Sergeant Willie Pete, huge fan of FD Signifier, huge fan of these uh, video essayist type content creators. I mean, yes, funny sound bites from Andrew Tate's or the John Zorkas or the Fresh and Fits. They're kind of funny, and I laugh. And, when I watch these little shorts that they do, the quotes they're taking completely out of context. But overall, I prefer the longer the longer videos here on YouTube, and the same goes holds true for music. I prefer lyrics, but I gave up that battle long ago. I used to be the guy that if a song wasn't lyrical, I would hate on it because I hated Southern hip hop when it first came out for the longest because I mean obviously I'm more into lyrics, I'm more into substance than I am style. So I hated like when P.D. Pablo first came out. I tried my hardest to hate on uh, Freaka League and the other one, North Carolina, or when Lil Jon and the East Side Boys first came out. I tried my hardest to hate on it. But I had friends that loved that kind of shit. I had friends that we would go to these house parties back in the day, and they would play that kind of shit. And now looking back, even the crunk era that I hated so much, or I tried so hard to hate back in the day, is still better. Lil Jon and the East Side Boys, or Trillville by some cut, or um, Nuck If You Buck is still better. Nuck If You Buck is still better than anything they put out today. So, Crime Mob, you know what I'm saying? So, what we thought was degenerative back then is even worse now. You know what I'm saying? Lisa was saying, "Oh, remember when I was telling her about the twerking where twerking originally came?" Um, yeah, I think it was Jason Whitlock. Who was a YouTuber on here, a very YouTuber, I believe. I think it was Jason Whitlock. Yeah, it was Jason Whitlock. He did a uh, he did a video on here talking about women that went to Ghana, the Elmina slave port. Now, for those that don't know, Elmina is one of the three main slave ports that African slaves during the transatlantic slave trade was shipped from. One is Gori, which is in Senegal. The other is Elmina, and the other is St. George's in Gambia. Now, most of the slaves came from the inland of Africa, the interior of Africa, and they had to walk miles and miles to the edge of Africa. If you look on the map, where these three slave ports are. Now, obviously, in 20, I think it was 2021 or 2020, Ghana opened up their tourism to African Americans to explore their roots, basically, to explore the historical experience, kind of like Auschwitz does with the Holocaust, right? So there's a video of four female tourists, four female African American tourists, standing on top of this slave castle, of this famous slave port where a tragedy happened, and twerking on top of this structure. And not only are they twerking on top of the structure, they are saying verbally in the video that this is for the ancestors. Now, will some people say that yes, twerking does come from Africa and it is a part of African dance that is part of twerking? Sure, you see it in many African cultures. It's called something different, but it is essentially an African mating dance or an African ritual dance. You see it manifested in Jamaican culture. You see it manifested as perreo in like Caribbean Hispanic culture. It exists. It does exist in other forms in other parts of the world, and it is something that the African slaves preserved as far as dancing, you know, in their rituals. It was even existed back in the day. They called it the butt, or they called it some other kind of dance. Spike Lee had a video for when he made the School Days movie. This was like in the late '80s. So uh, it does exist. But again, like in Arie is saying, is it appropriate for this setting? Even though it was an African dance, when the slaves were shipped from uh, Africa to America, to in chains, in bondage, were they celebrating? Were they dancing at all? Were they doing any kind of dance? No. This is a sight to be solemn, to be silent, to be respectful of, to remember, to mourn, not to twerk. Whether or not twerking comes from Africa or not, this is not a joyous occasion. People died here. People suffered here. This is a place of respect. Um, well, it's hard to make a parallel comparison with European culture because European dancing, um, white dancing, quote unquote, is not sexual in nature because of how sexually repressive and sexually restrictive Europeans always were. And that was one of the reasons why Europeans, white people, were so offended uh, by how Africans dance because they couldn't dance and they were offended slash jealous or envious of that the Africans had bodies that they could maneuver around and the whites were stiff and they acted all indignant about it. Oh, we would never do that because we uphold traditional Christian morality or whatever the hell, right? Before the slaves were forcibly converted to Christianity. So there's no really comparison. Like, of course, people that, but okay, uh, we know that Europeans love to drink wine, right? And to drink alcohol. They basically invented alcohol, right? They basically invented beer, wine. So would they go to? Would they go to on a tour to Auschwitz, the Holocaust Museum, or to anything that any mass grave, any tragedy thing that happened in European culture? That's something to be mourned and something to be sad about and something to be respectful of and quiet about. Would they go to that and start drinking and acting a fool? No. Would the Irish do that? And the Irish love to drink. The Irish love to act a fool. They love to act rowdy. That was part of their reputation in when they first came to America. Would they do that? No, of course they wouldn't. And if they would, people would people would call them out on it, just like the, they're calling out these women because there are negative and positive aspects of every culture. There are things that are done within every culture that um, people in that culture are to be ashamed of. And not that twerking is to be something to be ashamed of. There's a time and a place for it. The club is a place for it. The parties are a place for it. Historical sites where people died, where your ancestors died, people suffered, and you're going there to learn something, and you're going there to become more educated and to become part of spiritually with your ancestors, especially given that the more spiritual beliefs, the more animistic beliefs that Africans had. You know what I mean? That Africans actually believed that their ancestors, were at one with them. This was a part of traditional African religion where they were talking about in Ghana, the Khan tradition, or in Nigeria, the Yoruba tradition, or even in the some of them that were Muslims, some of the in Islamic, especially in the Islamic cultures in like Gambia and Senegal, and even for the people that are Christian, this is something. This is respect for the dead, respect for your ancestors. This is not the place for it. Not appropriate in this particular instance to be twerking. No. And people will say, okay, why are you getting on the women? The men will, but men don't do this. Like he said in the video, um, most of, and used the term, and this is a term that is used in the manosphere, and the black manosphere, Pookie and Ray Ray, Pookie and Ray Ray to symbolize, like, the ghetto guys, the guys that are street, uh, more street sophisticated, more ghetto type guys. These guys, even them, they wouldn't go to Ghana and start acting a fool and drinking Hennessy on top of the slave castles in Ghana and waving gang signs. They wouldn't do that. You know what I'm saying? Even if they could go there, they would have more common sense than that. And because, I mean, look where you're at. You know what I mean? And it's gonna cause other races of people to disrespect those sites because they're gonna say, "Well, you don't even respect them, so why should we respect them?" You know what I mean? You don't even respect your ancestors that left these shores in chains. As a part of chattel slavery. The Jews, they respect that. They respect the things of the Holocaust. They go to the Yad Vashem Museum in uh, in Israel. They go to the Auschwitz. They respect those kind of things. And they don't do that kind of stuff. They don't do it really anyway. But still, they have degenerate behaviors just like any other group. We don't really see it because, again, just like Asian people, certain ethnic groups are good at hiding their degenerative behaviors and they keep that in the closet. Every group has every group of people has people that do degenerate shit. There's no group of people. I'm not saying that uh, European people, Asian people, or Jewish people, or whatever, are morally superior. I'm not saying that they don't have things that they do that are reprehensible, but you don't see them doing that on historical monuments. You would never see a Jewish person going to the Wailing Wall and urinating on it. As a matter of fact, uh, one famous episode that Ozzy Osbourne did years ago, Ozzy Osbourne urinated on the Alamo. Now, the Alamo is a famous war site, the initial massacre of millions of white Texans by Santa Anna's government that basically started the war for Texas independence that led to the Mexican American War. And the slogan for this war, the rallying cry for this war was "Remember the Alamo." So Ozzy Osbourne, not being an American, not really understanding the gravitas of what this means to American or to white American people, urinated on the Alamo. Basically, took his dick out, started urinating on the Alamo, and people were offended at that time. People were like, "How dare he? You know, how dare he disrespect such a site where this massacre happened?" Because they understood that this is not what is done. But this case of the women was even worse than Ozzy Osbourne because Ozzy Osbourne, at least, he was British. He didn't understand or didn't. It wasn't part of his culture. But would he do that in front of Buckingham Palace? No, he wouldn't because he's British and he understands what Buckingham Palace or Westminster Abbey means to British culture. You understand what I'm saying? So these women are worse than even the Ozzy Osbourne situation because they're part of the culture. They understand what this means. The very fact that their ancestors live in America is a consequence of the events that happen here. It's a hollowed space. It's sacred ground. It's like Gettysburg. You know, when Abraham Lincoln made the Gettysburg address and he talks about Gettysburg and he talks about the hollow ground and the people dying there, both in the north and of the south, dying there. It's a place of remembrance. It's like peeing on somebody's grave or like twerking on somebody's grave. And these aren't just the grave. This isn't just the grave of one individual. This is the grave of many individuals, thousands of individuals. More people died in the transatlantic slave trade than died in the Holocaust or died in the Armenian genocide or any the Nanking genocide or any sort of genocide that we know about from the modern era. More people died in the African Holocaust in the coming year to the United States, to the Americas than any other place. The transatlantic slave trade is the most, I don't care what anybody else says, the transatlantic slave trade is the most horrific uh, inhumanity of man against man in human history. It's it got to be between that and the Native American genocide. But even the Native American genocide wasn't always an active genocide. I mean, yes, the Europeans wanted to conquer the Americas. They wanted to take over the Americas, but they didn't always want to. They didn't always engage in active warfare against the Native Americans. Sometimes it was diseases that were spread that the Native Americans, centuries of isolation from the old world, they just couldn't help it. Diseases were spread, and the Native Americans perished. But with the transatlantic slave trade, they knew what they were doing. They weren't doing it unintentionally. They were bringing massive amounts of people from one place and transporting them to another, stripping them of their cultural identity, stripping them of their heritage, and stripping them of their identity, their religion, their cultures, and their mores, and replacing them with inferior versions of European culture. That they succeeded, and they made the best of it, and they made it so good that European Americans and white people, their colonizers and their slave masters, wanted to copy and emulate. And like India Arie said, to bring it back to the original point, uh, that has become popular all around the world. That has become the face of American popular culture. Hip hop and R&B and soul music and black forms of music have taken over the globe in every part of the world. Africa, Asia, Europe. But does it always have to be the negative face of that? Does it always have to be twerking? Does it always have to be gangsterism? Does it always have to be that shit? There are other aspects to black culture that are more positive that they could sometimes represent. Uh, the Zora Neale Hurstons, the Alice Walkers, the Angela Davises, the Kathleen Cleavers, the India Aries, the Lauren Hills. It doesn't have to always be Megan the Stallion type shit. For the longest, when there was ratchet behavior in the black community, like even when jazz first came out, the African American talented 10 people that were involved with W.E.B. Du Bois and everything, they would shun jazz. They wouldn't embrace jazz, even though they were in the midst of it during the Harlem Renaissance in the 20s. They wouldn't embrace it because they didn't want to look bad in front of white people. They didn't want white people to look down on them. So the more out there aspects of African American culture, especially when it came to black people with more black political thinkers, but more of a conservative viewpoint. This is what they call respectability politics. African American thinkers with more of a conservative not necessarily conservative politically, not Republican or right wing or anything, not conservative in that sense, but socially conservative, like a W.E.B. Du Bois, like a Booker T. Washington, or like a Marcus Garvey, or even like Martin Luther King. Right? Martin Luther King, when you watch those videos of the civil rights movement, everybody's in suits, everybody's dressed up, sharp, respectable, doing respectable things. All the women are in dresses. All the women are looking really conservative, really Christian. As the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was this group. You didn't see any. And there were ratchet behaviors even back then, but you didn't see any of that because they put their best foot forward. Even uh, the more militant examples, like the Nation of Islam, they didn't do any of that. They always put their best foot forward, made sure that men's hair was cut respectable and that women looked respectable, in pictures and at rallies and stuff like that. They didn't do any of that stuff because they knew it would reflect. All these people understood that it would reflect badly on them by the broader society. Because the people that hated them, their haters and their detractors would say, "See, look at them. I knew they couldn't behave themselves. I knew that that's how they are. I knew that that was their nature. I knew that they were animalistic and savage. Everything that white supremacists always say about black people, that was basically their justification for the enslavement of black people. It wasn't the reason. Obviously, their reason was economic. What I mean? They wanted to economically exploit the labor of uh, black folk. But at the same time, what would they use as their justification? What would they say that was their reason? What they said that was their reason was it uh, the black people didn't have no culture, that they were uncivilized, they were unsaved, they were savage, right? And they were animalistic. That was what they always said. So, what would the leaders of these African American movements do? They would try to act other than that. They go out of their way to try to act other than that. And when there was some sort of, uh, crazy behavior, they would kick that person out because they didn't want it to reflect the absolute worst of what people were saying. They didn't want to confirm in the minds of their haters what uh, their haters were saying about them. They wanted to say, they wanted to show different. People on the news, they see Martin Luther King, people in suits marching in Selma, marching in other areas. They say, man, those people are getting the real short end of the stick. Look at them, law abiding citizens behaving, doing the right thing. And they're still getting beat over the head with billy clubs by these racist cops, these racist state sheriffs, or being hosed down. They're not doing anything wrong. They're completely innocent. They wanted to do that for a reason because they wanted to show, look, we're not what they say we are. We're not what the racists say they are. Now, it's like now somebody that's racist, somebody like a Nick Fuentes, somebody that is always saying that, uh, for example, uh, that African people or people of African descent are always genetically inferior IQ wise, right? And they have bad temper. Same old racist arguments that you heard from the 19th and 20th century with racism. They're still saying it, but now the difference is they could point to videos like this or performances like this and say, "See, I told you this is how they are. I told you that they can't behave themselves. I told you they're too violent. I told you they're too sexual. I told you they're like animals." And they could point to videos like this and say, "Well, see, I told you. I told you this is how their women behave. I told you that women were too sexualized." Not really realizing that their same women that they put on a pedestal and that they praise, these supposedly pure Beckys, are doing the same thing. You know, like, let's not get that twisted. They're they're doing the same thing or wanting to do the same thing. They're wanting the Beckys and the Brads that say they're so-called respectable. They want to do the same thing. They either can't, they don't possess the ability, or the social constraints of the situation in which they live prevent them from doing that. But they do it in secret. They do it not even in secret. They do it on freaking TikTok. Remember that video of the Drake song with Lil Baby, Wants and Needs? These two upper class white girls with Bud Lights and blue cans of Bud Light in their hand are sitting there rapping the entire lyrics of Lil Baby and freaking Drake. Lil Baby's part that is hard to understand. And they're sitting there rapping and they look like they have their hedge fund girls. They're like typical basic Becky's and You know, and these girls know the entire words to all these songs, so they're just as ratchet as the black women, but they make sure that publicly that they preserve their image and they do it in private. You know, unless they do a stupid TikTok video like that. You know what I'm saying? And then people call them out and they're hypocrisy. But most of the time, they make sure to keep it private. So, and they don't put it out there in their respectable. Um, that's that's all that India Arie is just saying. That's all. Thank you, Lisa, for contributing. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell button to see when my next video is coming out. Love you guys.